So we're now on Daf Kuf Yud Amud Beis, and we're on the top, the third word on the top low. The Gemara is saying that this Mishnah is not referring to a Chereshes Meikara. And Enochinami, if the Ishus from the get-go is only Drabanan, then just like he marries her Beremiza when she's a Chereshes, the Rabbanan are going to recognize and validate a Chalitza when she does Remiza, even without Kriya. But rather, what's the subject of this Mishnah? Bipikachas, she was originally a Pikachas, and the Ishus was Doraisa, the Acharkach Nischarsha, and then at one point she became a Chereshes. So now, her marriage, her Ishus, to the first husband, the late Ruvain, is Doraisa, and therefore, when Ruvain dies and his wife falls for Yibum, Chalitza is out of the question. Remiza is not going to be meaningful to break up a Zika Doraisa. So therefore, there's no Chalitza, and the only option for the Yavam is to marry her, and then if he had the goodness of his heart, he'll divorce her. Oshma, Abaye asks another Kash on Rabbah, and we're going to bring another raya from a different case in the same Mishnah. Shnei Achim Pikhin Nisuin Shtei Nochrios Achas Pikachas Achas Chereshes. So in this case, there's one marriage which is Doraisa to a Pikachas, and the other which is the Rabban. And again, we're going to go through the various scenarios. First scenario, Meis Pikach Baal Chereshes. So now the Chereshes falls to Yibum, to the brother, to the surviving brother. Mayasach Hasheni. Pikach Baal Pikachas. It's funny that the Gemara has to reiterate Baal HaPikachas. That's irrelevant. But okay, Pikach. And once again, there's no possibility of Chalitza because she's a Chereshes. Now, let's assume, once again, that, so what's the case now? A Pikeach Baal Chereshes. So that why is Chalitza not an option here? Because I'm just going to assume, maybe I'm wrong about this, and I'll correct my mistake as we go along, but let's assume that at the time of the marriage she was a Pikachas and then she became a Chereshes. Is then Kodes Bimrot Lahotzi Yotzi. Now, that's the case where who died? The Baal HaChereshes died, correct? Okay, now let's go to the other scenario. Meis Pikeach Baal HaPikachas. Mayasa Pikeach Baal HaChereshes O Choletz O Miyabim. So let's just try to understand the Chiddush here. They're not sisters. So on the one hand, right, they were two Pikchim. So the both are Achim are Pikchim, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be Miyabim, the wife of his late brother, who is a Pikachas. So Ol Choletz Ol Miyabim. Oh, so now what's the deal here? Let's go back to the beginning of this Mishnah, and it says Pikeach Shenasa. Let's assume, right? Again, Toshma, Shnei Achim Pikli Nesuin Shtei Nochrios. Yeah, I mean, in either case, he was a Pikech at the time of the marriage. Oh, So now we have, like when the Mishnah has two cases, we usually, if we know the exact reality of one case, then we assume the same reality for the other case. That's the literary symmetry of the Mishnah. So since the case is that he's a Pikach Meikara, it's logical to assume he nami Chereshes Meikara. Ukitani, kones in, choletz lo. Right, so we just finished saying, according to Rabbah, that in a case of Chereshes Meikara, there is Yibu. There is Chalitza, right? Rabbah said that since he started as a marriage of Chereshes, and the marriage was through Remiza, therefore the Chalitza is valid through Remiza, right? Your svara from before. And yet here, even though she's a Chereshes Meikara, Chalitza is out of the question. Why? That's a kasha on Rabbah. The Gemara rejects it. Midi Irya. That's not a proof. Ha-kedisa. You don't have to assume that just like he was a Bikach from day one, she was also Chereshes from day one. But rather, this Chereshes was a Bikachas when she got married, that she got a problem and she developed a Chershus, and therefore Chalitza is not an option. Because again, we come back to the same principle over and over again, that when the Nisun is Doraisa, then Chalitza with a Chereshes or a Cheresh is not viable. Now Abai brings a third din from the same Mishnah. And we're going to talk about a Chereshes who is a Chereshes from the beginning of the Nisun, and yet Chalitza is not an option. Esvei Abayis Rabbah. It says in the Mishnah, in the next part of the Mishnah, Shnei Achim Echad Pikach V'Echad Cheresh. Nisun Shtei Achios. Achas Pikachas V'Achas Chereshes. So we have now, if we match it up, a Pikach married to a Pikachas and a Cheresh married to a Chereshes. Beis Cheresh Baal HaChereshes. So we have now Nisun D'Rabbanan, and the Chereshes now falls for Yibam in front of the Bikeach, and the Bikeach is married to a sister. Is Ma Yasa Bikeach Baal HaPikachas. Right, we have an Erva Doraisa. Is Teitze Mishum Achosisha. She doesn't need Chalitza Yibam. She's an Erva. It's like the first Mishnah in the Masechet. Beis Pikach Baal HaPikachas. So now we're talking about Nisui Doraisa, and there should be Yibum. What's going to break up the Yibum? Achos Ishto, but that Isha is a Chereshes marriage. That's a D'Rabbanan marriage. So can a D'Rabbanan marriage break up a Zika Doraisa? Impossible. Ma Yasa Cheresh Baal HaChereshes. Oh, now we have another problem. He's married to Achos Kukoso. So he has to divorce his wife because there's no way we're going to allow him to live with his wife. His motzias ishto beget, right? His wife, who's a chereshes, she'll receive a get. Okay. The Ashes Achiv. Okay, now what about? I say his wife he divorced. So now Ashes Achiv is no longer what? No longer Achos Ishto. Asur Liolam. Why is that? I got it. She is Achos Krushaso. He just divorced her wife. He can never marry the sister of his divorced wife. He can marry the sister of his dead wife, but not of his divorced wife. So marriage is not an option. What other option is there? Chalitza? Chalitza is not an option either because he's a cheresh.
Right.
So you see that a cheresh can't give chalitza, which is against Rabbah, who holds that if the marriage was a marriage to Rabbanon of a cheresh, And just like he married her Baramiza, he can give a chalitza Baramiza. And maybe you'll give the old answer that we're not talking about a marriage that was originally Drabana and he was a Cheresh, but rather he was Bikech and then he became a Cheresh. Is me Motzi Mapik? Can he divorce his own wife? Just 1 second, but she was a Chereshes. Just 1 second. She was a Chereshes. So what's the problem now? Just give me a minute here. She was a Chereshes. Let's just read on. We'll see. Vatnan, right, in that Mishnah, which we didn't get to, it's on Kuf Yud Beis. It says that if a man marries a woman and she is a pikachas, v'nischarsha, is yotzi, he can give her a get. Okay, that's fine. But if he was Mekadosh when she was a pikachas v'nishtates, lo yotzi. He cannot divorce her. This is called shlo yinok ba minig hefker. Fine. Now, he was Mekadosh and Isha when he was a pikeach, and then is charish hu o nishtata. Lo yotzi o lovis. A cherish cannot divorce his wife. But again, that's because he married her when he was a pikeach. And that created a kedushin d'oraisa. So he cannot divorce his wife if he's a cheresh. He's a la bardas. Now, if we're going to say that when the Mishnah says that a cheresh bala chereshes is going to divorce his wife as a get, and we were talking about a pikeach achar nischaresh, is how does this work out with the ratio of the Mishnah of nischaresh velonish onishtates lo yotzi olamis elala b'cherish to make kara. We're going to have to say that at the beginning of the Suin, he was a cheresh, and therefore the whole ishus was the Rabbana. Umidahu cheresh make kara, he nami chereshes make kara. Okay. Mida achios chershos meikara. Nochios nami chereshos meikara. This is all to get back to the original Mishnah of Nochrios. Usnan legabi Nochrios. We saw with regard to Nochrios that kones in choletz lo. He could be miyabim her, but he doesn't have the opportunity of chalitza. So we see that even in the case of chereshes meikar mitchilas and suin, which is ishus d'Rabbanan, there's no possibility of chalita against Rabbah, who says that if she was a chereshes meikara, then there's a possibility of chalitza, remiza and remiza. Ishtik. So Rabbah did not have an answer to Abaye. Ki also lekami Rav Yosef, when Abaye came from Rav Yosef, and he presented all his questions on Rabbah, Omer Le, Rav Yosef responded to Abaye, my taima tosve meha. Why did you ask him a kasha from the Mishnah? The Yochel Shenuye Lecha, Rabbah could give you an answer because your kasha is not solid and ironclad, because we can differentiate and say that not all the halachas in that Mishnah are in the same situation of chershus. In the din of shtei noshim achios, that's the case of chershos meikara, right? We try to prove from achios to nochrios. Maybe in the case of the achios, we know that it's a case of chershos meikara, but nochrios, maybe it's a din of pikos, the achach nischarshu. And therefore, since they were pikos originally, which is Nesud Oraisa, therefore Chalitza Biramiza is not an option. But if she was a Chereshis Meikara, then just like the Kedusha was Biramiza, so too the Chalitza would be Biramiza, as Rabbah said it. But Ella, if you wanted a kasha against Rabbah, you should have objected to Rabbah from the following. Another din in the Mishnah, where you cannot interpret it as a case of pikachas shenischarsha. It's only a chereshes meikara, and yet there's no chalitza. It says shnei achin chershim nisuin shtei achios pikros or shtei achios chershos, or two achim chershim are married to two achios chershos, or shtei achios achas pikachas biachas chershos. So in all these cases, the two achim are chershim, and they were married to two sisters. The sisters might have been pikchos, they might have been chershos, or one was a pikachas, one was a chereshes. So in all these cases, both brothers are equal. They're both chershim. So that means their marriage was biramiza. Whether or not she was a pikachas is irrelevant. V'chein shtei achios chershos. Now both sisters are chershos. Nesuos l'shnei achim pikchim, or l'shnei achim chershim, or l'shnei achim echad pikechet cheresh. And here too, the nesuin of these two achios are both nesuin biramiza because they're both chershos. But it's irrelevant to whether the baal is a pikech or not. The wife is a chereshes, and therefore the marriage is only drabanan with biramiza. Harei elu peturas min hachalitzu min hayibum. When these two women fall for yibum in front of the surviving brother, there's no need, not for chalitza, not for yibum, because it's achos isha. However, im hoyu, if these two women were nachrios, not achios, then there's no chalitza, because he's a cheresh and he's not a bar chalitza, or she's a chereshes and she's a lav bas chalitza, but rather yichnosu v'imrotzu lahotzi yotzi. Hechi dami, what's the case? In what situation of cheresh and chereshes is the Mishnah speaking? That initially the marriage was doraisa, ni motzi mafke. Can the chershin be motzi give a get to their wives that they married at the time of pikchus? Vatnan nishtates lo yotzi nischarish hu nishtata lo yotzi olamis. So there's no possibility that a woman that he was mekadesh as a pikachas, he can now divorce her as a chereshes or as a shota. Or if he became a cheresh, he cannot divorce her. So we cannot be talking about a case where the original marriage was when they were pikrim and therefore it's doraisa, because then get is not an option. El alav, we're going to have to assume that that's chershimei kara, that they were originally chereshim, and therefore get is an option, because otherwise, if they were originally pikachas, then get would not be an option. Umidehen, the brothers are chersha meikara. Inu, the wives, nami chershos meikara. Uktanim hayonachrios yichnosu in nachlutu lo. Tiyufta the Rabbah, tiyufta. And the Gemara doesn't have an answer to defend Rabbah.
Shkoyach.